Carmel Cipollone.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to address some of the inaccuracies that have been brought up by the previous member, Christopher Bishop, but I think I might start by actually addressing the bill that we're here to discuss in the House tonight. And Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure whether the previous speaker actually even mentioned what that bill is. In fact, I don't even know if he came to the House knowing what the bill was he was speaking on. But Mr. Speaker, I will just speak to the bill. The bill is the Sentencing Protection of Children from Criminal Offending Amendment Bill. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy tonight to take a call on this bill. We will not be supporting the bill, but we do support the intent of the bill. And I do want to acknowledge Asinati Lolia Taylor for her work. We may not have always aligned exactly with our political views, but I do respect her as a former parliamentarian, and I respect the work that she did with this bill, despite the fact that we may not agree with it or support it at this stage. This bill amends the Sentencing Act 2002 to make criminal offending in the presence of a minor an aggravating factor at sentencing. Where the offender endangers or exposes a minor to potential adverse effects from that offending, the sentence must reflect this. Criminal offending by adults often exposes minors to serious harm, and we all agree in the House that that is the case. A primary example of such offending that's been spoken about by several members tonight is the production of drugs, particularly methamphetamine. Production of these substances is regularly conducted in residential buildings, putting the lives and health of resident children at risk of poisoning and burns resulting from the highly dangerous and unstable chemicals used in such production. And my colleague Jacinda Ardern talked earlier tonight about the large proportion of households or buildings or places where methamphetamine is being produced, where there are actually children who are living in that vicinity, or where there are children who are exposed to the harm of that methamphetamine. So it is something that we here tonight, all of us in this House, share some concern for. We accept and we are concerned about the fact that minors are often the innocent parties to criminal offending by adults and deserve protection from adult offending that puts them at risk of harm. We oppose this bill, Mr. Speaker. However, as the Select Committee report states, we support the intent of the bill and consider the safety of children to be paramount. We can't support this bill though because there are several problems with it. Some of those problems have been cited by my own colleagues, some of those problems have been cited by other members of other parties. The application of the bill as introduced would be too difficult to enforce. The definition of in the presence of a minor is far too broad and would encompass everything. The definition of in the presence of could potentially encompass public areas such as shopping malls or roads. As such, it would be difficult to apply in practice. The Select Committee stated they are confident that judges already consider the presence of and potential harm to children when sentencing, and requiring them to comply with a rigid framework might hinder the use of judicial discretion in those situations. Case law demonstrates that the police and the courts already take the presence of a minor into account when prosecuting and sentencing offenders in the situations the bill is intended to address. Mr. Speaker, I haven't been on the Select Committee, so unfortunately wasn't there for the public submissions, but I have gone through some of the submissions, and one of the submissions that I was particularly interested in, which really aligns tonight with the views of many people in the House, is the submission that was put forward by the New Zealand Law Society. And I think the submission that's come from them is credible. They have analysed what the legislation would entail, whether or not it would be effective, and the answers they've come up with really are the answers that align with what we've heard here tonight. So the New Zealand Law Society, like many of the parties in the House, welcome the opportunity to comment on the bill. They accept that the bill amends, they state that the bill amends the Sentencing Act and what that entails. They point out that the objective of protecting children in these circumstances is laudable, but that the Law Society considers the bill is unnecessary. The courts already routinely take the presence of minor into account as an aggregating factor, for example in prosecutions for domestic violence, drink driving and drug offending. The Law Society point out that this was illustrated in a recent methamphetamine prosecution where the Court of Appeal endorsed prosecutions for neglecting a child in circumstances where the child was exposed to methamphetamine. So the quote used here is, it is appropriate to observe, however, that we are satisfied the charge under section 195 was properly brought in this case, and that it is an appropriate charge for a situation such as this, where a parent with control over a child allows that child's health to be habitually compromised by exposure to an unsafe environment made so by her own criminal offending. So this is relevant to the general policy of the bill, Mr. Speaker. The explanatory note that a primary example of such criminal offending is the production of drugs, particularly methamphetamine production of these substances, is regularly conducted in residential buildings, putting the lives and health of resident children at risk of poisoning and burns resulting from the highly dangerous and unstable chemicals used in such production, which was what was stated earlier from the Labor Party point of view, and which is shared across the House. So in the Law Society's view, Mr. Speaker, whether minors have been put at risk of harm by offending is a factor that should be left to the court's discretion to assess in each case, rather than through this bill, because actually, Mr. Speaker, the Law Society and many of the other experts that came to submit on the bill pointed out that this bill actually could put at jeopardy the discretion of the court to assess each case in the way in which they are currently able to. So, Mr. Speaker, it's good when we are in a situation where the majority of the House agrees on legislation. I did hear earlier one of the other members point out that this particular bill that we're considering tonight has been floating around Parliament for 7 or 8 years, and I accept what the other members said in that things have changed over the last 8 years. So the intention, although good, may be overridden by the fact that other legislation has come into play that actually discounts the need for this particular bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I do want to return. I said I would initially start by actually addressing the bill, which the previous member didn't do, but I would like to address some of the issues that the previous speaker did bring up. And I thought it was a bit of a cheap opportunity to take when we're talking about sentencing protection of children, a serious matter that we all take seriously in this House, that we all share concerns for, but to take the opportunity that member did to try and push the National Party agenda and to try and infer that they have been successful on the law and order front, when actually, Mr. Speaker, what we are getting out in the general public is the exact opposite. The feedback that we're getting from the general public is that the national government have failed abysmally when it comes to law and order. And Mr. Speaker, just addressing some of the things that were raised by the previous speaker, Mr. Bishop, where he raised that we have had reoffending rates drop. Well, my learned colleague Jacinda Ardern did bring up that actually that was because reoffending has gone down because of community-based sentences. I also just wanted to say, in addressing the statements made by the previous speaker, that unfortunately, what we've seen under a national government is the dissuading of reporting of crimes, and in fact we have police who aren't even attending crimes such as burglaries to the same extent anymore, and so people aren't even taking it to the police. That doesn't mean there's been a reduction in crime, that means there's been a reduction in reporting because of the fact that we don't have the police numbers or police on hand to attend to those cases. Mr. Speaker, we also had some statement made by the other side that they have done wonders in the area of rehabilitation. Can I just point out that it was really just a continuation of the Labor Party work that had been done during the 9 years that we had in government. And Mr. Speaker, finally, when the national government talk about the decrease in crime, I have to point out actually that we're not seeing that in West Auckland. What we're seeing in West Auckland is that we've become the murder capital of New Zealand, and we're certainly not feeling any great service by the national government in the area of law and order. So in fact, Mr. Speaker, I want to point out before I go back to the bill that the national government have failed New Zealand on so many fronts when it comes to law and order. The one good thing that I can say that they are doing is, alongside us, they are opposing this bill because it actually doesn't do what it was intended to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.